Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're going to talk about what we've learned from a year of online teaching. But before we do that, Claire, tell us, how was your week?
My week was good. I just wanted to mention that I've been reminded how awesome it is to celebrate things.
Ooh.
And we got our favorite Indian food as a celebration of the end of the semester, and we celebrated the beginning of the summer with a camping trip to the beach, and it's just so good to remember to celebrate things and do nice things. So I just wanted to mention those things.
I love that because I think it's so important to mark things. And I'm realizing I haven't done any kind of, it's the end of the semester, this is what I'm doing to sort of mark it. And it's so important. And especially these days, right, where we don't necessarily, I think we've gotten out of the habit of some of those things.
Sure.
Being at home and stuff. And so definitely having some kind of special... And you've kind of given me an idea because we're coming up to the end of the year for the girls too.
Perfect.
And so something to mark the transition and not just kind of... But it's hard when you don't have... I think the thing that happens most to me is maybe not having the energy, but it's so worth it to do it anyway.
It's so worth it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Like a little thing is very symbolic, you know?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I love it. Okay, good. I like that.
Good. What about your week?
So my week, I'm reading a really great book that I'm really enjoying. It's called The Rose Code by Quinn. And I've read a few of her other books that were about like spies in Nazi Germany.
Ooh.
And this is set, like it's fiction, but it's set where like these three women work in Bletchley Park during World War II, where there's like all the code breaker stuff.
Okay.
And I'm just so into it, all about it.
Cool.
Ladies doing code breaking, love it.
Code breaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
I am not a code breaker. I basically, like, people will even be like, look, here's the key, here's how it works. I'm like, I still don't see it. So I do not have those skills. But yeah, like I like a good crossword for sure. But yep. Not going to be a code breaker. But it's super cool. It's definitely interesting. And then it's kind of historical fiction where like Alan Turing pops up in one bit. Like he was, you know, and so they kind of have sprinkled in these real characters who were definitely there. And so I like historical fiction.
Yeah. So is it like the main characters are fictional, but they're in a historically accurate setting?
Exactly.
Historically accurate.
Perfect. Yeah.
Totally.
And I think I told you in a previous podcast, I have this curse of sort of curiosity of doing and like reading, consuming media that is too scary for me. And I've
definitely done that with World War II stuff.
Oh God, yeah, seriously, it's like, but I also read a book before this that was like really good, but quite creepy and sort of psychological thriller. And it just had my nerves a-jangling. So obviously nothing relaxing about World War II in England, but somehow people sitting down to solve codes in 1940s clothes is relaxing to me. So anyway, I'm feeling it.
See it.
I'm enjoying
it. That sounds enjoyable.
Yeah. So can I tell you my quote for this week?
Yes. What is your quote?
So the other thing I've been sort of like hearing about or reading about was, do you know who Sinead O'Connor is?
I don't think so.
Oh my God, you have a treat. But she is a very famous Irish singer.
Oh, okay.
And she wrote a song that's sort of worldwide popular, which is Nothing Compares to You. Or she didn't write that. Prince wrote it and she recorded it. But she's just a very extremely powerful voice. And she's kind of interesting in a lot of ways because she did some things that people felt were very controversial. And then it sort of turned out to be later on like appropriate. So there was a famous thing where she went on Saturday Night Live and she ripped up a picture of the Pope. And this was... could not have been more scandalous in Ireland, but she was protesting some of the cover up of like abuse scandals and things, which then later on all came out. And so anyway, she's a very interesting character who has had an interesting life and very, very beautiful music. So check it out. But anyway, she has a quote, which I think is maybe relevant for today's episode. But the important thing about brave is it doesn't mean you're not terrified. And
good one.
It's something that's quite sweet, but it's come up with the girls a couple of times over the last week where they're like, but I'm not brave because I'm really scared. And you're like, that's exactly when you are brave. Like, if you're not scared of it,
Doing
it's
it
not.
anyway.
Yeah. It's not really bravery. So anyway, I like that quote.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I have been reflecting a bit on the complete terror of facing into this last year, which was very difficult.
So we now have a little more than 1 year's experience of online teaching, as does a lot of other people this year. And so we wanted to take the episode to kind of synthesize the things that are working for us and the things that we're still working on after having 2 and a bit semesters under our belts of experience with this. So,
do you remember we kept saying we'd come back as experts? So I just want to like have
this
the caveat.
This is us as experts in air quotes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ruth, what's working for you?
Okay. So I think the biggest thing that has shifted for me this year is believing you can connect with students online.
Ooh.
And I think I talked about it a lot on here, where I kept thinking that first semester, like, oh, well, thank God we had that bit in the beginning in the classroom, or like I would never be able to work with these students, because we went online halfway through the semester. And so that was what was really haunting me going into September or August, was like, we can't make this connection from the beginning. It's impossible. And so I do now believe that you can do that.
You can start from total zero with students and make a good connection fully online.
Yeah.
That's
and
really good.
It's just different than in the classroom, but it's not totally substandard. You know what I mean? Or it's not totally less than. So there's that. I think.
I love that. Yeah. And I have noticed, there are lots of students that I only know virtually, but had this past 2 semesters.
Oh, because you had 2 in a row.
Yeah. So I had, because they took my 300 level and my 400 level class. And you're right. I do definitely feel like I know them. And I look forward to meeting them in person one day. And we have made the connections. I'm really glad you brought that up. That's nice.
Although it is interesting, I sometimes don't do it with students who never put their cameras on. I just have a hard time not even remembering them, but visualizing, obviously, because I didn't see them.
Sure.
So it's like, that's a bit different. I think the other thing, I have a few more things. So one is, I think like I get very quickly institutionalized to things.
Okay.
Where I'm like, no, I can't do anything different than what I've always exactly been doing. And that's how I felt when I started teaching. You're like, no, I can only do exactly what I was doing for my PhD. I'll never be able to transition to this type of job. And so it's kind of somehow, I would not call this year a raging success, but, it's kind of interesting to be like, oh, my old grey matter can handle trying new things. And so that was good too. Like maybe a bit of confidence about trying other things, or even, I feel like if someone had asked me 2 years ago, do you want to try online teaching? I would have run away screaming, and absolutely not. So that is kind of interesting. I think I've come to the conclusion that there is no set way to do virtual teaching. And I think it really depends on the learner type. And I think that we got a lot of, there existed this sort of sphere of online learning that was pre-pandemic, and we all harassed those people in the beginning, well, how do we do this? What do we do? And they were super helpful, but those things was a different demographic and a different type of student.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
The ones who were choosing to do online for whatever reason, pre-pandemic, are a different pool. That makes sense.
Totally. So I think that now I would be very wary of any article that is like, here's how you teach online, or here's 10 things you have to do for an online class, or anything like that, because I think it's so sensitive to what kind of students you have, what kind of material you teach, because there's some things I just don't know. When you're doing a lab, it's just very different than other kinds of material, or whatever it is.
Sure. And
then I think it also depends on your life. And, I think I've talked on here about, I had to make decisions about when to meet students, or, how to have, say, having recorded lectures because of, the kids being home and doing school with them. And I think I kind of had a lot of, some hang-ups about that, and, that wasn't a valid decision, but it totally is. Valid, because it's what worked. And yeah, anyway, so I think I've kind of settled on that and feel a little bit more reasonable that of course you have to choose things that are going to work with your circumstances, you know, within reason. You know, not like, actually I'm having kind of a hard semester, I don't think we're not going to interact for the entire 10 weeks, but yeah. So, yeah.
Depends on your circumstances and depends on you and what works for you as a teacher as well as what works for the students and the material. I love identifying that there are all those variables and that are going to have an impact. Yeah.
Right. And like next semester, I think I'm teaching 3 classes. One is very, very baby freshmen who are fresh in the door and who are coming from high school. It's a class specifically designed for that. Man, we might need to bleep out baby freshman because that's super patronizing and not how I meant it quite. But then the physics class I'm teaching is an intro physics class, but it will not be, what am I trying to say? It will not be, it's the first physics class, but they're not usually freshmen. Like they've usually been here for a bit. And then I'm teaching an upper division class, which students will have been here for 3 years when they take that. And so I do think the approach to each of those will have to be quite different. And I don't think you can just have, this is how online teaching works, because I don't know if that's true. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really like how empowering it is to realize that there are these variety of ways that it will work, and it's up to us to figure out what works for our particular circumstances. And that's really, it is empowering to realize that.
Yeah. So I think all that helpful, I don't mean to, like, all the information we got from people who were teaching online, like, was super helpful and definitely informed so much of what I did.
Helpful.
But I think I got kind of hung up about the fact that my class wasn't totally asynchronous as maybe being a bad thing. But then I do think for the stage that my students were at, that's kind of what they needed, a bit of synchronicity. Is that the word? But yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay, so tell me about you. What worked for you?
A few things. So I'm really on board with synchronous lectures. And again, now that you've said this, all these variables, this has to do with my students, of course. But my students are generally ones who would be at school all full-time taking classes. And I think it's really helpful for them to have the scheduled lecture time when we all get together online at the same time and talk about stuff. It allows them to have interaction with each other and with me. I'm super down with that. I really like using the platform Gathertown, which I think helps facilitate the conversations really well, where they can interact with each other and then they can interact as a whole group and I can talk to all of them or just some of them. It's a really good platform for having the interactions that I want to have in a classroom of all the different groups that we could have talking with each other. So I'm super into that. I also have been excited about how it actually is possible to foster a community among virtual students.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that has worked in my classes is some group lab assignments. And in the lab portion of the class was hybrid, where some people were virtual and some people were face-to-face. But I was really struck by a particular collaboration that formed between a fully virtual lab student and a face-to-face lab student. They worked together on a lab assignment, and then they worked together fully virtually on totally other parts of the class from then on. And so it was just really nice to see that by working together, and I'll call it virtually because they weren't physically together ever, but then they started working together, and then they started talking about other assignments together, and it's just really nice to see that can actually happen in a classroom setting that's where they're not actually interacting in person. So that was really nice to see. I also really like taking attendance and having some points for attendance in the synchronous virtual lectures, but also posting the recordings afterwards. I was really surprised by how many people watched the recordings, even if they'd been in class, but they would watch them to cover whatever content they were struggling with for the exam or whatever. One time I was a little slow posting one and somebody was like, "Oh, when's that going to be up?" And I was like, "Wow, somebody actually watches these. I didn't know." So
can I ask you, did you put them on YouTube?
No, I did the recording on Zoom. So we had Gathertown as the platform we were exchanging with, but I used Zoom to record it, and then I just posted the Zoom recording link to our
Could you tell
Canvas
how much
page.
they watch them?
I think you might be able to find that in Zoom, but I haven't.
Okay,
gone in to
okay.
look.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you can get that information, but I didn't. And then this is my most exciting one, I think, for me, is in-class group work. You know, the classic problem that we've talked about a bunch of times is you have group work, and you can go around to the different rooms of people working on their group work, but it's hard to really just eavesdrop. It's hard to know where they're at. It takes some time to transfer. All of that is improved, I think, by using Gathertown instead of some other platforms, but it's still a little bit cumbersome. Mm-hmm. It's not the same as being in the classroom and hearing them all chatting. But what I really enjoyed doing was having a shared Google Doc or Google Slide or whatever for each group. And they basically have their shared worksheet, and they type things, and they cross things out, and then they type new things, and they're working on that together. And I have all the different tabs open on my screen, so I can just pop in, kind of eavesdrop, but also read through what they've been writing, and I can really get a quick summary of what they've been talking about this whole time just by reading through what they've typed on their Google Doc. And then I can,
I love this so much.
It's so, it really does, to me, feel like it gets around that massive problem in virtual group work, where I can quickly see what they did. Maybe they're talking about something and it's on a great track, but I just want to point out that they messed up problem 2. So, like, I mentioned that, and I know they messed up problem 2 because I can see it. It's just, I really am a fan, so I'm super into that.
Can I ask you about this worksheet?
Yeah.
So this is, I'm just getting specific about my own. I'm like, tell me how this will work for me. But
Totally.
like, are they just typing in numerical answers, or are they showing their work? I think a thing
good question.
that sort of trips me up is my worksheets are a lot of like, it's a lot of handwritten kind of stuff. I wish, of course, this would be if we were infinitely rich and all students had like a mechanism for writing on a tablet. It would be so great. I would love to have like a slide and they're all contributing, but maybe I could figure that out. But
yeah, you're right. I mean, the semester that I figured this out and was really excited about it, or that I heard about it, was really excited about it, it was more conceptual, and so there was less calculating. We did have a shared whiteboard feature on Gathertown, but it was a little bit hard to use. So it wasn't, I mean, they did do that sometimes if they needed to do calculations, but it wasn't as smooth as it could have been. So yeah, I think you're right. If they're typing thoughts and concepts, it works great. If they want to actually do calculations, then that does get a little more tricky. And there's got to be a good way to do that, but I don't have a good answer for that.
That's so cool, because I think that's the bit I've been really struggling with, is like getting a temperature gauge of where they're at. And if you could look at that document and then be like, oh, okay, you guys are only on question 3.
Yeah.
Or, wow, you're on 6. We can have a luxurious conversation about whatever. Like, that's, that's super helpful. I love that. Yeah.
I wonder if there must be some kind of program that they could pull up where they could all draw on it. And hopefully, whoever had a tablet could use that. But if they just had their mouse or their touch screen, that would at least be better than nothing. There's got to be something.
There was another professor I heard of who was doing something with Jamboard. And that's how people were solving math problems. So maybe I just need to review what she sort of had shared about that, because that would be super cool.
I'll look that up. And if any of you listeners have a great solution for this,
please
definitely let us know.
Yeah.
Yes. So those are my things.
I love it. That's awesome.
So what are you working on?
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue. It's almost like we planned it, but we didn't. But group work is a thing that I really struggle with. And even when you said, like, you had this lab assignment, and I really struggled with anything that involved them working in a group outside of time we were on Zoom. I struggled also with group work in Zoom, but there was so much pushback and stress about getting them to try and do. So I don't know. I think I've discussed all the minutiae of how everything was structured, but the first semester I didn't have live labs. Like, it was an assignment that they did, and they should have a meeting time to get together and work through this lab. And that was asynchronous with, like, hopefully quite a few steps described. But it just fell apart, and they would never meet in their groups. Some people would just do it and hand it in by themselves. Other people were like, I was waiting to hear from people, and they never, like, it was just such a train wreck. So that group work. So then the next semester we had was online. But sometimes they wouldn't finish because it was only an hour and a half. And again, it was just as soon as they had to meet outside of time, just it all fell apart. That was a complete disaster.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know how to do that. I think one thing I was trying to find is the balance between engaging and tormenting people. So it's like the first semester, I think I was borderline harassing people. Like, and I mean, it was also exhausting. And then last semester, like burnout is real, and I was definitely not. They weren't as engaged. I wasn't as like I was engaged in the teaching, but I wasn't as engaged in. Claire, you haven't handed anything in. I'm emailing you 15 times to check if you're going to. Like I just didn't do that to the same extent. So I think, yeah, kind of finding that balance between that, and I think the biggest question I have for myself is, what would it be like? And I guess hopefully I can answer this a bit more in the fall, is what would it be like to teach online when students are acting more like students? Because for me this year, and legitimately they had terrible, awful life things happening, but the students just weren't like students at all. Like this was...
Sure, they were living from home, or who knows what they were doing, in addition to all the stuff going on in their lives.
Totally. And sometimes it even was sort of social stuff, like they were traveling quite a bit. And, you know, obviously they would not do that, you know, and you're like, just because you can move yourself from here to here doesn't mean you're going to stay focused on class, like just because it's virtual. And, you know, I had issues with students working during class time, or like being in work, or people being like, I'm actually at the grocery store right now. And all of those things I did not make a big deal about, but you're obviously not going to be super focused in your group if you're wandering around the grocery store on your phone. So I wonder, for us next semester, most students are going to be back on campus. And so I wonder, will that have a little bit more of a studious vibe? And
yeah, good question.
Like I talked to a lot of people last semester too, where even students like didn't go to their homes or wherever they were going to live for the semester until like 2 weeks into the semester. And I had a lot of students who were like, oh, once I get settled in, then I'll start doing stuff. And you're like, no, the semester started 3 weeks ago. And so I wonder, and then even just having resources, if they're back on campus and are
will they be able to go to the library or go to some gathering place to work together? Sure. Right.
And, you know, or a quiet place even for class. And so I think I'm super curious. I'm kind of just like overall curious about, would it be a more successful experience to teach a physics class online if like there wasn't quite as much craziness as was happening last year? So that I'd be super interested to find out about that.
That's a great question. I'm also wondering about the resistance you were getting to students getting together virtually outside of class. And I wonder, since now you know this is something that was a lot of resistance, I wonder, did you or could you structure it, like scaffold it, like so-and-so is in charge of making a Zoom link and so-and-so is in charge of doing a doodle poll to figure out when you're available, or I don't know, something like that.
I think I didn't set expectations properly in the beginning. So I wonder, is that like a thing I should do? And yeah, I think I think I've talked about on here, my lab groups in lab usually just kind of blob up together, like who's sitting near each other. So it's not a thing I usually enforce. But I guess I just have to get comfortable with like, well, tough. Like sometimes you'll work in a crummy group and it's part of, you know, and I think I'm hearing more and more people talk about it. It's giving me more confidence to say, like, this is a skill set that you're developing. If you are in a crappy group 1 week, then, you know.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think I just need to get more comfortable with that. And I'm sorry, it's a pain. You have to track people down and harass them, but that's group work, you know, so.
And it, you know, it happens quite often, I feel like, that students will be in a group and someone will tell me at the end of the semester, oh man, I really didn't like so-and-so at the beginning, but now that I know them, I really like them. I'm so glad we were in a group together, or something like that, you know? So it not getting off to a good start. I feel like if you have a group that needs to work together for a while, it's going to take a little while to work out the kinks and come up to how you guys are going to work together as a group, you know?
Yeah. And I think, again, and you know, maybe some of that was some of my expectation setting. Like if I was a bit wobbly on that, maybe if I was more hardcore, like, no, this is happening, then Joe would respond to the email about a meeting time. Or maybe if I'm just too ambiguous or seem like it's not going to be enforced. So yeah, I think it's definitely something. And I'm all about this. I wonder too, could your idea with the Google Doc be utilized more? Like if I ever did have an asynchronous lab, you could be like, I will be watching and you will be, you know, putting stuff onto this Google Doc throughout that time. So yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you could even say like, email me and tell me what time you guys came up with.
Oh,
which, like,
yeah.
you don't have to do anything but during that time because you might be busy, but then they have a responsibility to pick a time and they know that you know that you're going to be on the Google Doc at that time or something. That could be cool.
Yeah. Cool. So tell me, what about you? What are the things you're thinking
So
on?
sometimes, so this is how my lectures generally go is we do a lot of group work, but we also do a lot of me talking about concepts and going through them on the board. And when we're doing that, I do have back and forths, you know, I'm asking them questions. I'm letting them think about things. I'm letting them do calculations. But I guess what I'm working on with online teaching is on the days when I'm spending more time at the board or the virtual board, I feel like it's less okay than with if we're in person and I'm spending a lot of time at the board, I still feel like we're getting lots of interaction. But if we're virtual and I'm spending a lot of time at the board, I feel like the interaction just plummets to hardly anything, you know?
Yeah.
So one thing I'm thinking about doing is I didn't quite work out logistically last semester, but I kind of want to have them sit in groups in Gathertown so that when they arrive, I was kind of hoping then we'd have this virtual classroom in Gathertown last semester, and we all sat in the same classroom, you know, in this virtual space. And I was hoping that they would like chat before I got to class, but as far as I'm aware, they never did. But I think maybe if they were in little groups instead of in the whole classroom, they might be more inclined to chat.
Yeah.
You know, like it's the same person that they're working with all the time. You know, 2 of the 3 group members are there early. They say hello, good morning. I think they might do that. So, and then I think that would help. I think that would help in general, potentially be more positive interactions with your group, but also in particular on those days where I'm spending a lot of time talking about content and they're not spending a lot of time working in groups, they can still get that good morning, how are you with their group before class starts. So I'm thinking about doing that to try to address this issue that I feel like is sometimes I just talk and the interaction just plummets when it's in a virtual setting rather than in a face-to-face setting.
I love that idea. You know, I wonder,
I'm excited about it.
And I don't know how this would translate again to disciplines like chemistry or physics, but I wonder, could you even have, I don't know, but like just to kind of pick up your idea about the Google Docs, like a shared note-taking thing or something where they were taking notes together. Or it's just,
that's interesting.
I don't know. It's such a, like, this is more negative than I mean it to, but it's so hard when we have so much content to cover. Because you think of all the cool creative things you could do. Like if you had a class where you had to lecture a lot, you know, and you could give them some kind of like, okay, in your group, you're going to pay attention to this and like summarize what I said at the end, or I don't even know. You know what I mean? Just something. But sometimes you're just like, and there is, I have certain sections of my course, which is just me talking for like, and I'm aware, like in the classroom, you're like, those are the days where I'm going to be writing the whole time at the board, you know, like it just naturally falls that way. So, but it's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the whole depth versus breadth thing. And if you have to do breadth, then you have to do breadth. But if there's definitely an argument for cutting content and being able to do the depth. Even so, I really do value the time where we're covering content and I'm providing them accurate information.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
You know? So I like to have that. But not at the cost of all interaction between the students. So
right.
Yeah. I'm going to try having them be in their groups, I think.
It's kind of funny. I was thinking about my kids, and somebody is moving to this area, and I was thinking about what I might say about the schools in the area. And we have incredibly awesome schools here, but there is everything in all of the ranges, from like very, very strict to much more loosey-goosey. And I think my kids, just knowing what they're like, they need a little bit in the middle. Like they definitely can't handle things being totally chaotic. And I was just thinking it's really similar to like active learning, because I'm sure there's people who can do it, but as a student, I think having only active learning would stress me out so much. And I definitely like those periods of content delivery in addition to getting to practice stuff and use it. But yeah, it's just interesting. I agree. And I don't know if I know anybody on the poles of that either. Like who are like one extreme, even with the kids, schools say like one extreme or the other, but
like everybody's kind of somewhere in the middle, you're saying?
Totally, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, cool. I think now that we're certified experts in virtual teaching, we can maybe that's just what this podcast will become. We're like, here are gems of wisdom from
what
virtual
problems
teaching.
do you have about online teaching? We got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just have to straighten out a few of my own first, but yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, Claire. I still don't entirely know how we made it through this year, but there we go.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm going to celebrate.
You and to everyone who has made it through this much virtual teaching.
So much.
Yeah, celebrate. I love it.
Right. But, and I think I mentioned a bit at the beginning, it's amazing what people, like I felt like, I'm like, no, I've been doing this one way too long. And it's only been like 7 years since I started teaching. And people who've been teaching for so much longer just rolled their sleeves up and were like, all right, show me how to use this Zoom thing. And people are amazing. People are amazing. Yeah. And passionate about making sure their students have a good experience. So yeah. Yep. We were brave because we were all terrified. So that's what I'm going with. Okay, see you, dude. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.